Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with the Charles Coulombe.
As always.
Do you have anything to say before we get started today?
Have I anything to say? I have a lot to say.
Oh, okay.
For one thing, we know it's summertime. Your allergies are out.
I know.
Well, we'll plow through them.
Okay, good.
All right. Well, let's see. You know, this past week was the 4th of July.
Yeah.
And I've got to tell you, I love the 4th of July. Now, this will horrify those of you who know that I'm a monarchist and I favor the loyalists and the Jacobites. All true. But I love fireworks. And the 4th of July reminds me of the America that I was born into. A country that's now about as dead as ancient Sumeria. But it did exist once. And just as ancient customs from Sumeria and ancient Egypt have come down to the present, so too with things like the 4th of July. I was up with some friends at Lake Tahoe, and it was great. Before the fireworks began, we had a barbecue with ribs and chicken and little tri-tips, things like that. It was very good.
Yeah.
Potato salad and corn on the cob and American flags all over the place. I mean, you know, if I wouldn't have been surprised if Norman Rockwell had been hiding in the bushes painting. And then the evening descended. And it was interesting because one of the guests was a priest, a pastor, a local pastor, who, as it turned out, had been a pastor at Mount Shasta. So I had to ask him if any of his congregation had been Lemurians.
Of course.
Which he started laughing about hysterically. The trick, ladies and gentlemen, in life is to drop some obscure joke on people that only they will get, leaving everyone else to wonder what you're going on about. Anyway, I digress. The fireworks.
Yeah.
Now these fireworks, ladies and gentlemen, weren't just over our part of the lake. There were no less than 5 spots along the lake where fireworks were going off.
Wow.
Oh, it was brilliant.
Wow.
And the reflection on the lake water of the fireworks. Oh, it was brilliant. But it's important to remember that the way we celebrate the 4th of July, with the fireworks and the banquets and the speechifying and the parades, which we didn't have in Tahoe, I hadn't seen it, but in years gone by I certainly have seen them. We borrowed all of these in the way the colonial Americans celebrated the King's birthday.
Really?
Yep, in exactly the same way that we celebrate the 4th.
Wow.
We just repurposed the manner of celebration. Kind of like Christmas has been repurposed into holiday.
Yeah, that coincides with something I think you say in Star Spangled Crown, which is that America is not just a function, I mean, it's a function of the monarchies that came previous to it.
Yeah. I mean, we had a history before July 4th, and we have had a history since. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, whatever you might think of the Founding Fathers or their doctrines and dogmas or whatever you want, the fact is that America is here. It is the country we live in. And I, for one, love it very much. I've been all over it, all 50 states. And much as I love a lot of other places in the world, this is the country of my birth, and I really, really love it. So, although I've got...
You've been to all 50 states?
Yes. What's so shocking about that? You don't think they let me
I'm
to
surprised
Arkansas?
that you counted it out, too. Wow. So you went to Alaska?
Although I didn't see much of it, only Sitka.
Oh, okay.
I can't claim to be a real aficionado of Alaska.
Oh, okay.
If you ask me about Anchorage or Point Barrow or something, I'm going to say I don't know. And I've only seen Honolulu in Hawaii. Not only that, in Honolulu, I've only seen a couple of churches, Iolani Palace and the Arizona Memorial. So I've been in all 50 states.
Yeah.
But
that's good enough.
No, actually. And that is the thing, though. I mean, even the states that I've traveled the most extensively in, California, New York, New England, Louisiana, seen a lot of Texas, and lived in New Mexico for a couple of years. All those places, so much more have I yet to see in them.
Wow.
Including the state of California.
Really?
Yeah, even L.A. You know, and that's another thing that's worth pointing out, ladies and gentlemen. One of the great things about the arrival of the GPS, it is that you could put on the little thing, avoid highways. And that will take you through surface streets.
Oh.
You will see parts of your own city that you've never seen before. Now, mind you, some of you will want to do this at night. Trust me on this, but, you know, it depends on where you live. At any rate, there's nothing I love more than exploring even our own city.
Wow.
Well, you remember, I showed you a section of San Marino you'd never seen before.
That's true.
See? There are places out there, ladies and gentlemen, just around your corner, waiting for you to see. I say, go see them. Oh, and while I'm on that topic and we're getting all Americanist, I'm happy to report that American Heritage Magazine has, after about 5 years of near-death experience, finally revived. I can't recommend it more highly. In fact, all of their episodes are online. Not episodes, all of their articles, going all the way back to 1959, are online. It's a wonderful treasure trove, including, and I'll cut out this section of the chatter with an article that I loved as a boy and I love now. It was called The Glorious Unsafe Fourth. And it was the reminiscences of a fellow in his boyhood, the 4th of July, when they didn't use safe and sane fireworks.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a great article. So just remember that. American Heritage, The Glorious Unsafe Fourth.
All right.
So what do we got?
Let's begin. So this year we've been staying away from news headlines a lot, but this one particular headline was so unusual that I just couldn't resist.
Okay.
From WatcherofTheDawn.com, the headline is, Golden Dawn leaders count tragic cost of magically protecting Donald Trump. In the article it states, the chiefs of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn say they lost their dog, their car, and nearly their lives after working magic to protect U.S. President Donald Trump.
Wow, that's tough. Their dog.
Imperator David Griffin said that these magical terrorists were subverting the will of the American people and seeking to topple our republic by striking in synchronized rituals month after month just before Black Moon, when the energies of darkness and evil are at their most powerful. The series of rituals was to reach its crescendo on the summer solstice. Griffin said that, unfortunately, the Secret Service does not yet have a magical arm.
No.
So him and his wife, Leslie McQuaid, stepped up to the plate to neutralize the magical threat to the First Family.
Oh, thank heaven.
But he said that due to media hype, he and his wife were badly outnumbered, especially as those who did answer his call were mostly untrained in battle magic.
Oh, do they have any blood elves or any pandas?
Not to my knowledge. So what do you make of all of this, Charles?
They come from the Inquirer? Well, oh man, people have a lot of time on their hands. Well, what do I make of it? Obviously, the presidency is tottering on its very, very something or other. What do I think of that? Well, it's cray-cray. No. I don't mean to say that, certainly. I need to show respect. Suddenly I feel very tired. Is it me? I don't know what to say, really. I mean, I'm sorry about the dog. One thing you've got to bear in mind, well, firstly, historically, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn ceased to exist about the 19-teens, early 1900s. There have been different splitter groups and offshoots that still survive. And since the rise of the internet, tons of people claim to be the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Well, the only thing wilder than the claims of some of the folk who claim to be members are the claims of those who claim to oppose it. So, for instance, one of the things I often hear is Oh, the Golden Dawn, they produced Aleister Crowley, the Satanist. And I always have to point out, they expelled Aleister Crowley for being a Satanist.
Wow.
It's kind of like attacking the Catholic Church because Martin Luther was a Catholic priest.
I see.
I mean, that doesn't mean that either Catholicism or Martin Luther or the Golden Dawn or Aleister Crowley are any good. I'm just saying, if you want to be accurate in what you're saying.
Right.
Which, of course, is never important to moderns, but if you want to pretend. So, let's step back for a minute. The Golden Dawn does actually have something of an interest and an importance. The original order, I mean, I don't know who these people are, I've never heard of them, but which doesn't mean they're not important. Ladies and gentlemen, even though I live in California, I will not repeat what was said to me once by a young lady in this state when I mentioned something or other to her, and she said, "Oh, if that were important, I'd have heard of it." No. For all I know, these folks are deeply involved in defending Mr. Trump's presidency, and without them, the Republic would come to a shrieking end. Maybe, I don't know. So I'm not going to pretend I know for sure.
Okay.
But the importance of the Golden Dawn, shall we say, to more conventional scholars, is actually more literary than anything else. And that may sound sort of strange, but the reason is that a number of very famous writers were part of the Golden Dawn. People you've heard of, like Charles Williams, who was one of the Inklings, Arthur Mack and William Butler Yeats, and also people who were famous once upon a time but you may not have heard of, like Sax Rohmer, who invented the character of Fu Manchu, who you may have heard of. No. All right, doesn't matter. Anyway, suffice to say, why did this attract, what was this thing, why did it attract so many literary people? Well, the Golden Dawn was, to put it in one sentence, a society of people who practice ceremonial magic. Now, what is ceremonial magic? What is magic? What does it all mean? In a nutshell, magic per se, at least according to the medievals, was the accomplishment of ends out of all proportion to the means employed.
Okay.
Which means if I put my hand out like this, and that book comes sailing into it, all I did was put my hand out and the book came into it. That's magic. Ah, but how did I accomplish it? Through strange mind powers? Or was it a demon I've enslaved? Or to whom I am enslaved? Or was it my guardian angel? Or was it an elf? Well, those are other questions. But the point is, I put my hand out and the book came.
Okay.
Now, the theory behind magic, and this was a very important thing to bear in mind momentarily, was based upon the Platonic philosophy of the Middle Ages, in which the use of the right words, the exercise of the right will, and the right means were important to anything you wanted to do. And it has to be said that it was that milieu influenced, or was influenced rather, by our own sacramental theology. Why? Well, you know, to have a valid sacrament, you have to have the right intention. That is to say, you need to mean to do what the church does. You've got to have the right form, that is the right words. And you've got to have the right matter, which is what the sacrament is made out of. In the case of baptism, it's water. In the case of the Eucharist, it's bread and wine, and so on. If any one of these things are off kilter, you have no sacrament. Well, magic was supposed to work the same way. And then they divided it depending upon what was used, what being or element was used to accomplish what they were trying to get after. That gave us the different kinds of magic. All right. So, in the 19th century, along with the Romantic Revival and all sorts of other things were going on, you had, both in continental Europe and in England, what was called the Occult Revival, when people began to look into these things again, which they hadn't done for quite a while. Well, the Golden Dawn was formed by these sorts of people, and you can see why this kind of thing would interest writers and artists and actresses and actors and all that, were exactly the kind of people who went into it. How valid was it? How much did they really accomplish? That I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that a lot of claims have often been made by magicians that are not necessarily so. So, for instance, there were Golden Dawn spin-off magicians in England during World War II who claimed to have been in magical fights with Hitler's magicians.
Okay.
And you had the same claim made by various Wiccans, who were another sort of people, although they too believe in spellcasting and so on. And if you believe these people, then you'll be happy to know that World War II was won on a magical level.
Wow.
How true is that? Well, I don't know. As a Californian, I hesitate to say anybody is full of chaff, but I don't want to discount the possibility that it's all guff.
Okay. Well, you know, the big question on everyone's mind, I mean, it seems like there's so much magic, so many people doing magic all over the place. Is this happening because of the influence of Harry Potter books, Dungeons and Dragons, and fantasy literature in general? Should we just eradicate all of these things?
I'm sorry, what was the question? No, should we eradicate the imagination? Should we eradicate King Arthur? Let's shoot Merlin. Let's rip apart everything that isn't in the here and now. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. The Soviets wanted to do that. It's a smart move. No, I mean, honestly, I feel about this stuff the way of all people Dr. Laura Schlesinger did.
Okay.
And Dr. Laura was, I remember listening to this one time and giggling fit to burst afterwards. This woman calls and says, Dr. Laura, I've got a question. Well, of course, people always have questions. That's why they call. But anyway, she said, what is it, dear? She says, well, I'm just worried about Harry Potter and all this magic and so on. She's going on and on and on and on. And Dr. Laura took one of her famous Dr. Laura pauses. She breathed deeply, you know, to avoid saying something she would regret. And then said, dear, this country has a lot of real problems, like abortion, like, the ruin of marriage and the family. That's actually a lot more likely to be a problem than the formation and kids forming covens on street corners. If I were you, that huge energy you seem to have, why don't you put it into that and accomplish something about that? The truth of the matter is that fantasy literature is an easy target. If you don't like it, if you don't enjoy it, then it seems creepy and weird. Of course, I feel that way about professional sports, but that's me.
Right. See, I've always held that, you know, I'm not impressed by people who condemn things that they already hate to begin with.
Well,
it's more impressive to condemn something that actually you have an attachment toward.
Exactly, and that they know about. I mean, frankly, when people come to me and they say, should I let my kids read Harry Potter? You know what I tell them? Read them yourself. If you don't like what you see, what you've read, don't let your kids read it. If you like it, it's fine. All right, let them read it. When such a person says to me in return, oh, I don't have the time to do that, well, then shut up, please. If your children's reading material is not important enough for you to take time, well, what is? Watching John Wayne movies? What? I mean, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a parent, what in heaven's name could be more important to you than what your kids read? You know, my dad, I can tell you this much. My dad used to read not all the series, but at least one out of every series of fiction books that my brother and I were interested in. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, he also introduced us to a lot. Because it isn't enough. If you think, oh, I don't want you reading that. Okay, so give them something else. Give them something you consider decent. If you don't like Harry Potter, or God help you if you don't like Lord of the Rings, for which I pray God's forgiveness on you, that's fine. But give them something you do enjoy. Because if you don't, if your constant dealing with your kids is simply what they can't do and simply negativity, you will lose them. I promise. You've got to give them something. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, you have to have something. So, think back to your own childhood. What did you enjoy reading? That you could look back at now and still consider wholesome. If you don't want them reading whatever, fine. Give them something else. But make sure, ladies and gentlemen, you have something to give them. Don't just take away without replacing, or they won't listen. I promise.
Okay. For our next question, Mark wrote in saying, "Hello. I've heard I've heard an anecdotal story on an internet comment which said that your father, Charles,
yeah, speaking of fathers,
did not allow you to watch Archbishop Fulton Sheen's program on television. Is this true, and if so, may I ask why? Further, what is your opinion on Archbishop Sheen and his television program? In your book, Puritan's Empire, you write that life is worth living, Sheen's show, comforted but did not challenge.
No.
What do you think about Sheen's cause for canonization as well?"
Well, I'm going to answer that in reverse order. Firstly, the cause for canonization, I'm all for it. If the man's a saint in heaven, and if he can rack up the miracles, then I'm all for his being recognized as such. So, let me say that. Also, let me say that the later Archbishop Sheen, who was not popular, certainly not popular amongst a lot of the clergy in this country, he was a hero. He stuck to his guns.
On what?
Oh, gosh, on church doctrine.
Like what?
Like the Blessed Sacrament, like apostolic succession, like the necessity for decent liturgy. And he, at one famous meeting of bishops, he was actually shunned by the lot of them.
Wow.
Yeah, so the later Sheen is a man who stuck by his guns. The early Sheen, the man who was popular, and I don't mean to say that they were different in the sense of being totally separate, but where I have to say that Archbishop Sheen is worthy of admiration is that simply because he was willing to sacrifice his popularity by sticking to what he knew was true. That's very admirable, ladies and gentlemen. Now, when he was popular, it was easy for him to be popular because everybody was saying the same thing. It was the 50s. And his message comforted but did not challenge the America of the 1950s. How do we know this? Because if it had, he would not have topped Uncle Milty in the ratings. Americans do not like being challenged in their views, especially when they share them. That's why President, Trump and Aunt Hillary were able to agree that we as a country are great because we're good. We are very self-affirming, ladies and gentlemen, as Americans. And this may sound a little bit funny given the orgy of love of country I partook in a little bit earlier in the program, but there is a difference between patriotism and unrelenting egoism. We're number one, we're number one. Okay, why are we number one? Well, the truth is, we're not number one. In a lot of ways, we're a very screwy country, especially to the degree that we aren't Catholic. And that is something that's been the case for a long time. We Catholics, in this country, we American Catholics, Catholic Americans, whatever you want to call us, did our country a terrible disservice almost in the beginning by settling for respectability as the price of not evangelizing. And the early Sheen was an example of that. And that is why my father was not keen on letting me watch him, because he felt that Sheen was a conformist. They'd go along to get along with a larger culture. But he did not end that way. And so having said all of that, yes, it's true about my dad not wanting us to see the early Sheen. And yes, it's true that he comforted without challenging. And yes, I support his canonization.
Okay. Mark asked a second question. I'm very curious to hear your opinion on Benito Mussolini. Yeah.
He didn't know Sheen, to the best of my knowledge.
You have spoken well of Marshal Pétain of the French state and General Franco of Spain, so to ask about Mussolini seems like the natural next question. What about Mussolini, who seemed to do many good things for the church and for advocating the guilds, etc.?
Well, that's a very good question. And the answer is I feel much more mixed about Mussolini. Franco saved his country from communism and was a practicing Catholic. Pétain tried to save and redeem his country from Nazism and communism and the revolution, and failed. But he certainly patronized the church to the degree that he could. Mussolini was an altogether different character. And my problems with his doctrine of fascism are the same as those of Pius XI in his encyclical Non abbiamo bisogno, which I recommend you read, and then you'll know what I think about fascism. But, and by fascism, understand, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not talking about anything I happen to dislike, which is what a lot of people mean by fascist. I mean the credo of the Italian fascist movement, when I say fascism. But, having said that, Benito Mussolini was an interesting mixed figure. Firstly, he was raised socialist by his father. That's why his name is Benito, which is the Spanish form of Benedict, not Benedetto, which is the Italian, because he was named after Benito Juarez. He was a good socialist in his early years up until World War I, when he broke with the Socialist Party of Italy over intervention in World War I. And he became a bit more of a nationalist. He was a Republican and anti-Catholic up until 1922, when becoming a supporter of the king and looking for reconciliation with the church was the price of his becoming duce virtually bloodlessly. And in keeping with that, he sought the 1929 Lateran Treaty, which in a sense settled the problems between church and state in Italy that had gone on since 1870. They didn't really, because he very quickly began violating certain elements of the Lateran Treaty, as recounted in Non abbiamo bisogno, which I recommend highly. That having been said, in 1943, the King of Italy overthrew him, King Victor Emmanuel III, which was his right to do because he was the king, and legally speaking, Mussolini was prime minister. So he was taken into custody, and then Hitler liberated him, as they say, and put him in charge of the puppet Italian Social Republic. And the Italian Social Republic was much purer in the sense that Mussolini was able to be a ruler freed of having to cater to the king and the church. That having been said, it has also been said that Mussolini, in his final days, had been consulting with Cardinal, now Saint, Ildefonso Schuster in Milan, and that he either had or was about to go to confession or this or that. I don't know if that's true. I've heard people say it. I hope for the sake of his soul it's true. The other thing is that, of course, he was killed with his mistress and not his wife.
Yeah.
Clara Petacci, and that doesn't speak well for his moral life. So, to answer your question, I do not bracket Mussolini with Franco and Pétain. However, having said that, I also don't bracket him with Hitler.
Well, okay.
Because, you know, many in Italian will tell you that if he hadn't sided with Hitler, he would have been a much better ruler. And that may well be true. Certainly none of the anti-Semitic laws and so forth that Hitler loved were put in to practice in Italy until then. And he was a great friend of the late, great Engelbert Dollfuss, who was the Chancellor of Austria. And you've got to give him some credit for keeping Austria independent when Dollfuss was murdered in 1934. At that time, he was still allied with France and Italy against Germany. And that only ended when he broke with the British and the French over Ethiopia. So he's a complex character. I don't particularly like him, but I don't particularly hate him either.
Okay. Herdewell asks... Herdewell. Probably let's take on their duel.
Yeah, I got
that. Charles, I have heard many Eastern Orthodox accuse Charlemagne of iconoclasm. However, I haven't been able to find any evidence for this. Have you ever heard this claim?
No. And having been to his church in Aix-la-Chapelle, Aachen, I don't see any evidence of it there either. Iconoclasm was loved by several Byzantine emperors, however. So perhaps the Orthodox that this individual knows will have to go back and check up on their own emperors first and then ask.
Okay. Anthony asks, what are the benefits of joining the Royal Stuart Society? And do you attend the annual dinners?
Yeah. Again, I'll answer the second one first. On the few occasions I've been able to afford to be in England at the time, yes, I have. Once or twice. And enjoyed them immensely, let me tell you. There's something about a white tie dinner that we Americans could really use. You're not Royal Stuart Society, but I attended a different one in London one time and went with some of the other goers to an after party in a bar. And there were a group of Americans. They looked at us all, the guys all in white tie. And one of them says to me, are you English or American? I said, I'm American. Oh, did you guys just come from a play? Were you in a play? Were you in a movie? I said, no. Well, why do you ask that? Well, the way you're dressed.
Yeah.
And I said, well, believe it or not, in this country, meaning Britain, people still dress this way sometimes for different things. And the fellow goes, wow, that is so PBS.
What? I don't know what that means.
Public Broadcasting System.
Yeah, but...
Well, that's where all the English,
that's like how they relate to...
Like Downton Abbey and Upstairs, Downstairs, that's where all the English period dramas show.
Oh, okay.
All the mysteries. So in his mind, he immediately associated that kind of clothing with PBS. Okay. And, and all his pals said, oh, yeah, it's really PBS. Well, after they left, my English friend said, Charles, what do you mean by that? I tried to tell him, but I couldn't bring myself to. I really couldn't. Anyway, so that's the first question. On those rare occasions that I've been able to afford to be over there at the right time, yeah. Now, as to why you would join the Stuart Society, well, that's a good question.
What is it, too?
That's another good question.
Yeah.
The Royal Stuart Society was founded after World War I by the survivors of a number of Jacobite societies, neo-Jacobite societies, that had existed before World War I. Now, if you ask why they broke up for the sake of the war, it's a good question. And the answer is that the Jacobite claims, the claims of the House of Stuart, had at that time descended to the Bavarian king. And of course, the King of Bavaria was on the other side in World War I. So pressing his claims during the war would have been a great way to go into a treason charge and spend the war in jail. Whereas, in fact, the vast majority of survivors of things like the Order of the White Rose were very prominent in war work. I mean, they were patriots. They weren't pro-German, despite the fact that they doubtless would have liked to have seen the King of Bavaria on the British throne. This didn't extend to wanting to see the Kaiser win. I know it's things get contradictory in life, just the way it is. But at any rate, again, as with so much else, Romanticism, the Romantic movement, had reminded the English-speaking world, and especially the British Isles, of the Jacobite cause. Now, unfortunately, as we know, the main line of the House of Stuart became extinct in 1807, and the family closest to the throne, closer than the House of Hanover that were actually seated on the throne in the person of Queen Victoria, their claims had gone through the female line from the House of Savoy to the House of Austria-Este and Modena to the Wittelsbachs, the Bavarians. That seems a bit odd, but if you can imagine, you've got a family, right? And they've got claims to a throne. Well, one throne is in the male line. Only men can inherit.
Yeah.
The other, women can inherit. Well, the three kingdoms, England, Scotland, and Ireland, their claims can go through the female line. So, what happens? Cardinal York, the last main Stuart, dies. His nearest cousin is the King of Sardinia, the House of Savoy. Neither he nor his brothers have any sons. So, eventually, the Kingdom of Sardinia goes to cousins, whose descendants now claim the throne. That throne. But one of them did have a daughter, and the Stuart claims went with her.
Okay.
She married the Duke of Modena. Their son was the claimant. But he had no sons. He did have a daughter. That daughter married a Wittelsbach prince. Do you see?
It's very complicated.
Everything in life that's worth knowing is complicated. That's why you didn't learn the alphabet and the times table in day one of first grade. But anyway, it is complicated. But suffice to say that female claims always jump houses, whereas male claims are straight until the house dies out. So, suffice to say that in the early part of the 19th century, in Spain, Portugal, and France, you had civil wars or other conflicts between the main line, the older line generally was in favor of traditional monarchy, and a younger line that was usually in favor of liberalism of one kind or another. And the supporters of the older line in France, Spain, Portugal were generally called legitimists. In Spain, they were also called Carlists after their claim. This is all the prehistory.
Okay.
So it's a little complicated, but you'll understand. So what happened was that the main recruiting officer, etc., of the Carlists in London about 1880 was a gentleman called Lord Ashbourne, who was a convert to Catholicism. Now, keep that in mind. He was a Carlist. He believed in legitimate Catholic monarchy. He had become a Catholic. He knew about the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and so forth. He looked at Britain and began to think, how do we apply those ideas to England? A legitimate traditional monarchy as opposed to the crowned republic we have.
Yeah.
Because you see, these dynastic issues was only part of it. They were, as I've said, ideological issues as well. So, suffice to say that under his aegis, a number of these neo-Jacobite societies grew up in England and Scotland and America.
Wow.
Yes. I'm not going to say it was a huge mass movement over here. I'd be lying if I said that.
Yeah.
But it was very much bound up also with the rise of Anglo-Catholicism amongst the Anglicans, the desire to re-Catholicize the Church of England and the Episcopal Church. Now, if you ever go to Boston, you will see a museum called the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which was the home of a woman called Isabella Stewart Gardner. See, sometimes these things are easy. She and an architect called Ralph Adams Cram, who, if you live in LA, you'll know is the designer of the library of USC and the interior of St. Vincent's Church across from USC. They were the two leaders of the Order of the White Rose in North America. They used to have Jacobite meetings in the chapel of the Isabella Stewart Gardner House, now the museum. Again, the movement attracted a lot of writers and actors and artists. Why? Partly the romantic aspect, you bet. Lost causes are always romantic. And you know why that is?
Why?
Two reasons, basically. One, because they're filled with romantic young people who generally die bravely, rather than, as with the same kind of romantic young people on the other side, live to become these cynical old and middle-aged people that run the show afterwards.
Oh.
And secondly, the lost cause is never responsible for whatever garbage you're going through now.
That's true.
So there's always the what if. You know, if only if only the scum who rule us hadn't triumphed.
Right.
Maybe things would be really different. Now maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. That's another whole other issue.
Yeah.
But that what if is a terribly exciting one. However, I digress. So you have these very interesting characters that formed these Jacobite groups, neo-Jacobite groups in England. Some of them were Celtic nationalists because the Cornish, the Irish, the Scottish, the Welsh were all rediscovering their traditional cultures at the same time. And of course, remember that the Stuarts, like the main line of the House of Bourbon in France, like the Carlist Bourbons in Spain, and so on and so on, believed in local liberties. They didn't believe in centralized government and mashing everything into one unified thing.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these folk came into this neo-Jacobite movement. A lot of the founders of various Scots, Welsh, Cornish, Irish nationalist parties, those living at that time, were members of these neo-Jacobite groups. Then there were those who, as I say, wanted to see the monarchy of Great Britain transformed from the Crown Republic it is into something more traditional, along the lines of what the Jacobite monarchy had been. But then, as I mentioned, came World War I. Everybody got out of the business. Why? They didn't want to be thought of as traitors. The war is over. Germany's overthrown all her kings, not just the Kaiser / King of Prussia, but everybody from the self-same King of Bavaria down to the smallest Prince or Duke. So it's okay again. And in 1922, the Royal Stuart Society is founded. And very early on, it attracts some pretty heavy-hitting writers and artists and so on, including the great Compton Mackenzie, whom you've never heard of, but is an important character. And what the Royal Stuart Society did then and does now is try to bring together people interested in both the Cavaliers of the English Civil War era, or the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, as they call them now, and the Jacobites, people with interest in them, or people who descended from families involved in them, or anything like that. People interested in, for want of a better word, I can only call traditional monarchical culture, which then was not a majority view. The difference, of course, is that the majority view in those days was far more decent than what it's become now. The whole scale shifted downward.
Yeah.
So, and I mean that in as nasty a way as I possibly can. Anyway, so what is the benefit of belonging to the Royal Stuart Society? Well, if you are looking for a cabal of plotters who are about to overthrow the Windsors and replace them with the current Stuart heir, keep looking.
Ah.
I know. But if you are looking for people and an organization and publications dedicated to the same unchanging values and principles that their predecessors held, then it's a really good place. And there are some absolutely splendid people. I'm an exception, but there are really splendid people who belong to it. And I'm very, very happy to know them and to have dealt with them.
Okay. Gosh, I thought that was going to be such a short answer initially.
Well, okay. Sorry.
That's fine. Will Johnston wrote in asking, the Sinarquista movement in Mexico is one that I have heard very little about, but have a great interest in. It is said that it followed the footsteps of the Cristeros, but I have also read of strange relationships with Nazis and even heard the claim that they and Archbishop Fulton Sheen were mixed up in some kind of fascist plot. Not taking these accusations at face value, perhaps Mr. Coulombe could give us a brief history of the movement.
You know, brief isn't what I do. But in a nutshell, the Sinarquistas were formed by a group of former Cristeros and their friends. The Sinarquista it's kind of an odd word, but you know what anarchist means?
No.
Without order.
Without order, okay.
Sinarquista is with order.
Ah.
So they set them up as the opposite of anarchists. They set themselves up. And these were people who, in the light of Mexican history, believed several things. One, that Mexican history had gone terribly wrong, and that that Mexico had taken several terrible wrong turns. Independence from Spain to begin with, overthrowing the first emperor, Iturbide, overthrowing the second emperor, Maximilian, and bloodily suppressing the Cristeros. They wanted to see a new Mexico, a Catholic Mexico, completely in tune with her Spanish heritage as well as her Indian. They wanted corporatism and all that, the guilds and all this sort of thing. And they regarded the United States as the particular enemy of Mexico.
Ooh.
Well, now wait. 3/4 of Mexican territory is now the United States. The United States, starting in the 1820s with Joel Poinsett, backed every single anti-clerical government and movement in Mexico against the Catholics and conservatives.
Okay. Well, that'll do it then.
Yeah, that'll do it. So, I mean, this is something, ladies and gentlemen, remember what I said back earlier, we're great because we're good? If you want to keep that view, and I'm all for you doing it, believe me, self-delusion is the key to positive thinking, and I stand for it. But, if you want to keep that point of view, ignore everything we've ever done overseas. That isn't to say we haven't done some good things overseas, because we have. We've done a lot of horrible things, especially in Latin America, and especially against the faith. So if you want to keep the delusion going that we're perfect, don't you be studying nothing in those areas. Anyway, I digress. Suffice to say that the Sinarquistas, as a result, also, strangely, wanted to see the return of those parts of the United States that had been taken from Mexico to Mexico. That's a weird wish, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, another thing that's very hard for us as Americans to understand is that very often foreigners love their country as much as we love ours.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I know it's a weird thing.
Huh.
I remember once hearing on the radio this one fellow going on when Vicente Fox was president of Mexico. He says, Vicente Fox doesn't give a damn about this country. All he cares about is Mexico. And I thought, who's paying his salary again? Who's he responsible to again? And don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not saying that the American leadership should not look after American interests. What I'm saying is we should not be surprised that foreign leaders and foreign nationals tend to look after the interests of their countries just as we should do for ours. And it's really stupid getting upset about them because they do. I mean, similarly, when President Johnson demanded that de Gaulle give him the keys to the French nuclear arsenal.
Wow.
De Gaulle said, well, let me ask you, Mr. Johnson, would you be willing to sacrifice New York for Paris? And Johnson quite rightly said no. To which de Gaulle quite rightly said, and that's why I'm not giving you control of our nuclear arsenal. And then Johnson blackmailed him and said, if you don't, you have to get out of NATO. And de Gaulle said, okay, bye-bye.
Wow.
A little bit of history that I can remember. That's how old I am. So, as I was saying, where this gets interesting, however, is that, as you'll have noticed, there are a lot of Mexican Americans in the Southwest. And during the 1920s and into the 30s, the 30s more, into the 40s, I should say, 30s and 40s, Sinarquismo spread amongst a lot of them. Now, who was the major enemy of the United States other than the communists in the 30s and 40s?
Anarchists? I don't know.
The Germans.
The Germans. Oh, 30s and 40s. Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, as a result, not just the Sinarquistas, but conservatives all over Latin America, all of whom felt done in by these United States, tended to look very favorably on both Germany and Italy, especially after their intervention in the Spanish Civil War. simply for the reason that A, remember they didn't know them, especially the Nazis, the way we know them.
Mm.
And number two, Germany was a long ways away, and was seemingly a creditable counter to the United States, at whose hands they had suffered. I mean, again, ladies and gentlemen, one of the most invidious things you can ever do is accept the maxim, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's not always true. It is, unfortunately, speaking historically now, an easy way out that all too often ends up in disaster for everyone concerned. The enemy of your enemy is often just as bad as your enemy. But that's a very hard lesson for people. So, where this all comes down to is that way back in 1943 or 4, something like that, we had riots in L.A. Yes, the big nowhere, having successfully staved off the attack in 1941, or 42 rather, early 42, by the aliens, you know, the Battle of Los Angeles, where depending on who you talk to, either nothing happened or Japanese Air Force planes threatened us, or maybe it was space aliens. The Battle of Los Angeles. LA stood all by herself against the combined might of the Romulan or whatever alien fleet and held it off.
Where are you getting this from?
It's history, the Battle of Los Angeles. Look it up.
It's history.
No, I'm not kidding. This does give it parenthetically, ladies and gentlemen. The Battle of Los Angeles took place in 1942, early 1942. There's a reenactment every year at Fort MacArthur. The civil defense detected, as they thought, aircraft over Los Angeles. And we do have photographs. There were lights in the sky. And so, first they ordered a blackout of the city. This was a Saturday night.
Wow.
So imagine, if you will, ladies and gentlemen, all the traffic lights, all the street lights, everything off. Accidents everywhere.
Wow.
Then the anti-aircraft guns opened up.
Really?
Yep. But you know the problem with firing when there's nothing there?
Yeah, what?
Well, the rounds that go up, well, they come down too.
Oh.
And go boom. So this added to the general confusion. And then the rioting started, the looting rather started.
Who makes that call?
It was civil defense.
Civil defense? What is that?
It is the organization of the United States Armed Forces that looks after
Wow.
internal defense here. And this, now in the morning, when the dawn rose over the city, and
Were people killed?
I don't know that it was killed. A lot of people were wounded, though, hurt. And a lot of shop windows were smashed by looters.
I would imagine.
And there were car accidents all over the place.
What a mess.
It was a huge mess. And to this day, civil defense insists that there were aircraft of some sort over Los Angeles that night. And it has achieved a role in UFO mythology. So, depending on how you want to take it, there are three possibilities. Either nothing happened at all, and it was some sort of weird mistake on the part of the civil defense, which can't be true.
Of course.
Or the Japanese planes came in over Los Angeles, but didn't bother firing at anything and left as quickly as they came, and for places unknown. Or, my personal favorite, it was in fact a UFO fleet. And the city of Los Angeles, through its unparalleled bravery, saved the world that night.
Well, we know it can't be number one, that they made a mistake.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure it can't be number two, because where are the ships?
Or the land bases.
So that just leaves number three.
Exactly. Exactly. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is how you know how things really work. So, LA, having saved the entire planet from alien invasion, still was riven with internal problems. And one of them were the service folk on leave and the Mexican Americans. I won't go into all the details, but the result were the famous Zoot Suit riots.
That's a song.
Yes, but it's taken from a historic event.
Wow.
And the Zoot Suit riots convulsed the city for a few days, pitting Mexican Americans against off-duty servicemen. Some of these Mexican Americans were Sinarquistas, and some of them, precisely to annoy, had Nazi symbols.
Uh-oh.
And that is the root of the question. But were they in league with the Germans? Did they read Mein Kampf? I don't think so. Did they enjoy annoying off-duty servicemen? Yeah.
How did Archbishop Fulton Sheen get thrown into this rumor? That's a stretch.
Let me tell you something. While we're on the topic of UFOs,
Yeah.
there was a gentleman called Charles Berlitz who wrote a series of books on the UFO at Roswell, where, by the way, I went to college.
Of course.
I did.
Yeah, I know.
But he claimed in the day after Roswell that James Francis Cardinal McIntyre, the Archbishop of L.A., had been driven out to view the wreckage at March Air Force Base.
Okay.
Now, a couple of little problems with that. One of them is that we still have in the Archdiocesan archives his appointment calendar, an appointment book for that week. It was Holy Week. He wasn't going anywhere.
Well, that's the perfect alibi.
Yep. Well, that's true. You've got the right kind of mind. And let's point something else out. He was my confessor when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So, you see this, ladies and gentlemen? Cardinal McIntyre, having witnessed the UFO at March Air Force Base and been brought into the conspiracy, was my confessor for 4 years of high school. And when that time was over, I went to college in Roswell.
Wow.
Coincidence?
No.
I think not.
I think not.
No. I hope you're staying on this ride with us, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I was about to say we've gone very far afield, but considering that we started out with the Golden Dawn defending President Trump, I think it's been a pretty coherent track so far.
I think so too.
We're really going off into Neverland, aren't we? Peter Pan and Captain Hook are showing up momentarily. All right, what else we got?
For our last question, Rico asks, what do you think of the organization called the Proud Boys? And why have they been so successful in countering the violent and radical left's efforts to stifle free speech?
Well, I don't know how successful they've been in doing that, but what do I think of them? Well, you know...
What do they do? Like, what do they... I mean, what's specific?
Well, specifically, they've gathered a bunch of young men who consider themselves defenders of Western civilization. Their founder was a gentleman, last year in fact, they're only about a year old, was a gentleman called Gavin McInnes, with whom I've wrote for Tacky Mag at the same time. Though I don't know him actually. That's neither good or bad for him or me, I just don't. But he founded this group, and it's basically meant to be a sort of fraternity, as it were, for young men who are interested in the defense of Western civilization. And McInnes has made it very clear he's not talking about white supremacy or white identity or anything like that, but quite literally Western civilization, which one has to utter over and over again is not a racial premise, it's a cultural premise. And my argument with anyone who says, oh, well, that's still too, it's a terrible thing. Shh. If you really think that, stop speaking any European language, please. No English, no French, no Spanish. Just speak some indigenous tongue and stop wearing Western clothing and eating Western foods. Otherwise, you yourself are a vehicle of oppression, colonialism, and imperialism. I'm telling you. So you need to get into that breech clout, you need to start eating grubs, and you need to stop speaking European languages. For one thing, it'd be a lot easier to debate anyway. Look at the guy in the funny clothes eating the grubs, haha. Anyway. A group of these, because as we know there have been in recent months, especially in California, especially in Berkeley, there have been attempts to, successful attempts, to shut down non-socialist, non-left speakers. And so in some of these places, groups of these folk, or affiliated with these folk, or claiming to be affiliated with them, have gone to the rescue of whoever was under attack. I've seen a few videotapes of it. And, you know, part of me, frankly, is a little reminded of Weimar Germany. You know, you get one mob and the other mob.
Yeah.
But it's important to bear in mind that phenomena of this sort are a reaction to what's been pushing in this direction for years.
Right.
And it would be stupid to think that you could push the American populace this far and not get some sort of blowback. The problem is not people, and you know, and again, the reaction can be smart or stupid. People being people, most reactions to anything are stupid in any direction. But the problem is not the blowback. The problem is the initial push. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We are ruled by an elite who are completely blind to anything but what they are interested in, who do not care about their subjects in the least. And they don't care what comes out of their mouths even. Governor Brown, our very own undead governor, back from the grave. He comes back from China last week, and what does he say? He says China's environmental policies are a model for the world.
Of course.
They have just exterminated the Yangtze Fresh River dolphin because of that bloody dam they built. The Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze.
Yeah.
They have their air pollution in Beijing and Shanghai. I mean, it makes the air pollution we had in L.A. When I was a kid seem, you know, wonderful. How somebody could say this with a straight face, and how the media could simply go, "Oh yeah, I see. I guess it's true because it come out of the governor's mouth." How can this be? So the problem is that when the elites, the brightest and the best, are that blind, stupid, idiotic, malign, whatever you want to call them, and they push so hard to remake our reality, to reshape our reality to fit what's in their little skulls.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen? And, one has to be honest, the Trump election was certainly a mighty symptom of this phenomenon. And they don't get it. They don't understand. They won't understand. I remember CNN melting down the night Trump was elected.
I loved it. I watched CNN. It was great.
It was beautiful. Anderson Cooper in near hysterics.
Ooh.
What's not to like? The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, we are ruled by people who cannot stop and say, "Hey, how did this happen? How did we get here?" It's all, "Oh, they're evil, they're awful, they're terrible." Nothing happens without a reason. And it's true, by the way, mutatis mutandis. When we look at our masters, at our ruling class, it's important to understand that they didn't pop out of duffel bags one day and decide they were going to become evil. And of course, I'm not saying they're evil. What I am saying is that the temptation for everyone is to simply demonize your opponents and forget that they came about for reasons. You cannot begin to undo damage that's been done until you know the reasons.
But that would require understanding.
Oh, I forgot, sorry. It's true, and it would require, it would require a tad of Christianity, as you might say.
Indeed.
You need to remember that high or low, above you or below you, richer or poorer than you, even of another ethnicity, race, or even creed. The other fellow is a human being also, with a soul to be saved or lost like your own. with a belly to be filled or empty like your own. It is a problem, ladies and gentlemen. Fortunately, in this particular installment, we've been able to stay on the weird side of things, which are always a breath of fresh air.
Yes.
I mean, the reality is so nasty. I don't know. I mean, heavens. You've heard me say in this space before that, you know, I understand the annoyance people have with reality. And again, going back to what you asked earlier about fantasy literature and so on, I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, one thing about magic, especially the fraudulent kind, it does give people the illusion of control. And that's very important. That's why we have superstitions, you know, lucky rabbit's feet and all that kind of thing. That's why people try to see the future. It's all trying to get control. The hardest thing for us as human beings to accept is that we have no control. God has control, and our free will has consequences. But other than that, no. That's a cheery note to end on.
I think so.
Well, with this, and by the way, I think you did very, very well despite the...
oh, yeah. I think so, too.
Yeah. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I guess it's almost Halloween in July.
Yeah, we're getting that feeling.
Well, bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if you're upset or offended by anything you've heard today, tough. No. No, I didn't mean that the way it sounded, did I? No, seriously, ladies and gentlemen, these are crazy times. And when the irrational seems triumphant, it's all the more important for you yourself to try to be rational. I don't mean rationalist, because that's as much a superstition as lucky rabbit's feet. But I do mean rational and civil. Try to remember that the other individual, no matter how much you may disagree with them, no matter how much you may even dislike them, is a human being very much like yourself, and like yourself, having one day to go before the judgment seat of God for all that he, she, or it has done or not done. And may we all meet merrily in paradise.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed this wild episode as much as we have. And we'll see you next time.
And remember, people of Earth, look to the skies.